registered. So thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Hannah Storch, and I'm a project manager with Pixel Acuity, which is the Service Bureau Division of Digital Transitions. Today, our presenter is Rachel Jacobson, who is the Digital Asset Librarian for the Phillips Collection Archive. Our moderator for today's event will be Carson Boykin, who is the Digital Transitions Marketing Assistant. And he, along with our marketing manager, Kate Stone, will be moderating the chat and flagging questions for the Q&A portion of the presentation at the end. So at the beginning of today's presentation, I will share with you a little bit more about digital transitions as a company. And then Rachel and I will talk about the Phillips Collection as an institution and her role within the organization. Rachel will begin her presentation about the digitization project and its institutional goals, and then I will touch upon the digitization process and how we at Pixel Acuity were able to help the Phillips Collection make the most of their digital assets. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to pop any questions and comments you may have in the chat, and at the end of the presentation, we will open the floor up to questions. So to get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about digital transitions as an organization. So DT was founded with the goal of helping professional photographers achieve their creative vision with the most advanced hardware and best service in the industry. DT Photo continues to bring industry-leading photographic solutions for hardware, software, and support to photographers, while DT Heritage is the leading designer and manufacturer of digitization solutions, including copy stands, scanning platforms, and automation software for the cultural heritage community. As the third and final division of DT and a service bureau, Pixel Acuity provides imaging solutions and services to the cultural heritage and corporate heritage communities worldwide. From works of art and natural history to film and archival documents, our team has all of the equipment and all of the skill to take on the challenge of any collection, no matter how diverse. We have physical offices in New York, LA, and conveniently located in the DC metro area. Our services and support cover all 50 states. So just a reminder to connect with us via our website, blog, and social media platforms, which you can find on the next slide. Sorry, one moment, there we go. And you can learn more about our digitization solutions and ongoing projects and innovations. So now I'd like to introduce you to our speaker today, Rachel Jacobson, who is the first full-time archivist at the Phillips Collection in Washington, DC. She was brought on to start up the first archival digitization for the museum's library and archive. She's originally from outside of Washington, DC, and has done projects in Amman, Jordan, Honolulu, Hawaii, and the very exotic suburbs of Baltimore. Her background is in archaeology and public history. So before we begin today, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Phillips Collection itself. It's actually one of my personal favorite museums in all of DC. So it is actually a collection that was founded by Duncan Phillips and Marjorie Acker Phillips in the early 1920s, and it hosts an impressive array of modern, fine, and decorative arts. But what I've actually always appreciated about this museum is the way that many of the galleries and exhibitions are arranged. They're arranged in a way to sort of show how different relationships happen between artistic expressions and pieces rather than just chronologically or thematically. So several years ago, when I had just moved to DC, I saw the exhibition of Jacob Lawrence's The Migration series, which was this very impressive 60-panel depiction of the post-World War I migration of African Americans from the rural South to the industrial North. I don't know if anyone in the audience was fortunate enough to see that exhibition, but for me personally, it's something that I still think about from time to time. And I was just sort of wondering, Rachel, if you had a favorite exhibition from the museum.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I have a public history background and archaeology background, so I don't have as much art in my background. But I was really drawn to the position that I hold now because of the work the project offered. So of course I'll go more into that later on. But I had been familiar with the Phillips Collection. I often went to the events that they held Phillips After 5, which was an opportunity to be more casual in the art space, and they often had drinks and music and things like that, which were really great. But so, I had kind of not a super, I wasn't up to date, I guess, with all of the new acquisitions and whatnot that the Phillips had been making. And so when I was interviewing for this position, I thought that I would just go in early and just kind of take a casual stroll around the galleries to kind of feel more calm before my interview. But at the time of my interview was actually the exhibit that's called The Warmth of Other Suns, which was a really powerful narrative about the immigrant experience during a time when there was a lot of really painful things going on, and so it was not a relaxing experience that I was expecting to have right before an interview, but I did feel really happy to see such a progressive exhibit at a place that I was considering working. So that is definitely one of my favorite exhibits that the Phillips has put on.
Well, I guess now that you've sort of mentioned how you started in the position, I was wondering more sort of how you found it personally with your background in public history and archaeology, how you ended up at the museum.
Sure. So without going into too much detail about how I got into archival work, I first worked as a processing archivist at North Carolina State University Special Collections, and really fell in love with the field. And from there, I slowly got more into the digital side of the archival field. And right before this position, I was working as a contractor at Smithsonian National Museum of American History, where I was working on a mass digitization project, which included several fairly complicated workflows on getting digitized images up into the collections management database, as well as the digital asset management system, to improve accessibility for these newly imaged material. So from that position, as that contract was kind of winding down, I was really hoping to find something where I would get to have more responsibility in making these workflows and in kind of starting a mass digitization project from the beginning of it. And so when I saw this opportunity, it was kind of exactly the type of work I was looking for. So I excitedly applied.
Yeah. I think this particular project, especially the digitization of the Duncan Phillips correspondence and photograph collection, is such a great example of collaboration between our organization, Pixel Acuity, and institutions such as the Phillips. And I was wondering how you came to choose us to assist with this project.
Sure. So I had worked on digitization projects before this one, and commonly, you'll find that a vendor may offer really great imaging, but then their metadata skills aren't quite as high as their imaging skills, or vice versa. You may find a vendor that's really great at the metadata type of things, but their imaging or technical savviness just isn't quite as high. But what I've really appreciated about Pixel Acuity is just how technically savvy you all are, but you also are clearly embedded in the cultural heritage sphere, which means that you do understand the importance of metadata and have been really flexible about our metadata needs. And yeah, so I've really enjoyed that, of course. And then also a huge benefit was that you could do your imaging offsite in a space that's local, and have been extremely accommodating in terms of picking up the material and bringing it to the facility, which has made a huge difference.
Great. Well, thank you. I guess we should get into the meat of the presentation now. So without further ado, we hope you enjoy the webinar. And Rachel, the floor is all yours.
Great. All right, so I'm gonna just bring up my slides. All right, so as we've sort of gone over already, this presentation is 100-Year-Old Archive, Embarks on Archival Digitization. As Hannah mentioned, the museum was founded in the early 1900s. It was founded 100 years ago. So we are celebrating our centennial year this year. I selected this logo because we're doing a program right now where artists were invited to reimagine the Phillips Collection logo for the centennial. And I thought this would be a good one to use because this artist, Dominic Raybrun, did a really great job at incorporating some of our showstoppers. So as you can see in the second 0, there's the luncheon at the boating party is represented there, as well as the Jacob Lawrence migration. One of the panels is in that background there as well. So I think we've heard enough about me, but I'm going to introduce a really important member of our team, Julie Folk. She is the part-time processing archivist for this project and has been a huge help. Julie has held a career in publishing and editing, as well as IT management, and decided to return to school for a master's in library and information science degree from the University of Maryland College Park. She specialized in archives and digital curation, and finished her program in 2019 and also started at the Phillips Collection in 2019. And here's a picture of her actually organizing the letters into alphabetical order according to the correspondent. I'll go a bit more into that process later on. And as we have been arranging our material and actually shipping it out to Pixel Acuity, we're also now focused on the accessibility side of things, which includes standing up an instance of the archival information management system, ArchiveSpace, which Julie has also been a huge help with. And as you can see, she's wearing a mask because a lot of this work was done over this past year. We're really lucky that we were able to be flexible enough to not have to halt our work, but obviously that was a huge curveball, which we'll talk a little bit more about later on. So Julie and I are not the only members that are making this project possible. This is partially an interdepartmental project. So we have Klaus Ottman, who's the Chief Curator and Deputy Director for Academic Affairs, and he is the primary on the grant. So I mentioned the grant. This project would not be possible without grant funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services, who have been in constant contact with our great grant writers, Bridget Zanguine and Victoria Potesek. So they've been a huge support for this work and really integral to the team. As I mentioned, there is the accessibility side of things. So I've been working with Darcy Vanderhoff, our Chief Information Officer, who works with IT and the web contractor or website contractor. And then of course, Library Services, which is where Julie and I work and is run by Karen Schneider, who also was a huge proponent in making this work possible. So outside of the Phillips, we have some really great partners. Of course, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which is an organization founded in 1996. They have some really amazing opportunities to offer institutions. We are using a stewardship grant for this project, which was awarded to us in 2018. We also have a really amazing consultant at the University of Maryland Libraries, Robin Pike, manager, digital conversion and media reformatting librarian. And she's been working with members of the Phillips Collection since 2016 when this grant narrative was beginning to form together. And then of course, thank you so much to Pixel Acuity, specifically Hannah Stork, Wayne Cozzolino, Eric Philcox, and John Santes. And I also just want to say thank you so much for taking particular interest in this project so that I can share more information about it. So I have kind of told you about the people behind the work, and now I will tell you a bit about the collection. So I'm focusing today on the Duncan Phillips correspondence, although as Hannah mentioned, we're also digitizing a fairly small historic photograph collection. And we're also going to be digitizing Marjorie Phillips' correspondence. So Duncan Phillips founded the museum in 1921. He was born in 1886 and passed away in 1966. And he was the first director of the Phillips Collection. And he actually was succeeded by his wife, Marjorie Phillips, in 1966. And then their son, Laughlin Phillips, took over from her in 1972. So during Laughlin Phillips' tenure as the director of the Phillips Collection, he actually gave 45 banker boxes worth of letters over to the Archives of American Art because he understood the value in the correspondence of the founder of the institution, Duncan Phillips. And at that time, the Phillips Collection just didn't have the capacity to really properly care for those documents. 16 archival boxes remained on site. And then it wasn't until 2014 that there actually began plans for reuniting this collection and returning those 45 boxes worth of letters to the Phillips Collection. So that whole process kind of sparked the idea of getting this material digitized, not really for preservation, but more for access, because these have really great value to the art history world, to researchers, and just to the novice artist. There's a lot of correspondence between various museums and art critics, as well as galleries and actual artists as well. So since 2016, this grant has been, kind of been conceptualized. And then in 2018, the IMLS, Institute for Museum and Library Services, awarded the Phillips Collection a stewardship grant for digitization of a specific part of the archive. And then in 2019, major strides were made toward moving forward in the digitization process. So that's the collection, and now I'm going to move on to showing some examples of what is gained by digitizing a collection like this. These obviously will be examples that are specific to the Phillips Collection, but I think they're pretty universal to getting any kind of foundational papers digitized and more accessible and discoverable and searchable for both people that work at a particular institution as well as people who are outside of the institution. So this is a letter between Elmira Beer, who was a secretary for Duncan Phillips, and Duncan Phillips. She's referencing a Manet that was borrowed by the Librairie Hachette. That's a French word, so sorry about that. And it's in Paris. And this is just a short excerpt from that letter. I hasten to reply lest even a few days delay might mean that the exhibition end and the painting be returned before they could make a photograph. Not particularly serious, perhaps, but our picture is important and I thought you would want it in as many books as possible. So I like this example because this is kind of like what accessibility might have looked like in the 1930s. The Phillips lent this piece of art out and they're getting to image it, and then that way more people get to see it. Whereas today we're imaging these correspondence and they will be online for anybody to see. So we have a little bit of clues. We have that this letter is from 1932 and we have that the painting is a Manet. So it's pretty likely that this is either referring to the Spanish ballet or boy carrying a tray. And the reason I say that is because both of these paintings were acquired in the 1920s and all the other manets that are still a part of the collection were not acquired until after 1932. So another thing that these types of collections can offer is a little bit more background in a city, which is kind of nice. So this is another letter from 1932. This is also between Duncan Phillips or Duncan Phillips staff and a library. George F. Bowerman, who may have been the director for all of the DC public libraries. I'm not 100% sure, but just for a little bit of context, a letter such as this would be filed under DC public libraries and not under the individual's name. So this is an excerpt from that letter. Some months ago, I took up with Mr. Watkins the possibility of borrowing from Phillips Memorial Gallery some paintings for exhibition in our Northeastern Branch Library. The matter was decided in the negative, I believe because that building does not have a watchman. So another thing that's kind of interesting about this letter is we see that the name of the Phillips Collection wasn't always the Phillips Collection. When it was founded in 1921, it was called the Phillips Collection, the Phillips Memorial Art Gallery, and that is because it was in memoriam of Duncan Phillips's father and brother. And it was very fitting that he opened an art gallery for them because Duncan Phillips's father offered him a huge stipend to collect art. And the stipend was given to both Duncan and his brother because they both really loved art. And then another interesting fact about that is they both died from the influenza. And so of course there is that parallel between when the museum was founded and the pandemic going on now. So the letter goes on to say, that condition does not hold in the case of our central library and 3 of our major branches, namely our Mount Pleasant branch, 16th and Lamont Streets. So I live in Petworth, Washington, D.C., and I see that library all the time. It's still there. Our Southeastern branch, 7th and South Carolina Avenue Southeast, and Tacoma Park, 5th and Cedar Streets. So this is a picture that happens to be from 1932. I figured I would be able to find one from the 1930s. I wasn't expecting to find a photo from that exact year, but that is the Southeastern branch from 1932, the black and white one, obviously, and the color one is the library today. So as you can see, the exterior really hasn't changed at all, which is kind of interesting. So this letter kind of gives an example of how digitizing something like this can give more depth to resources that already exist within your institution. There are some other interesting things about this letter that I will also point out, but this is between Lillian Avanti, a performer in the 1940s, and Duncan Phillips. This letter is from 1941, which is the first year that the Phillips Collection started its concert series, which still goes on till today. So these are 2 excerpts from the letter. The first part is from the second paragraph, and the last part is from the last paragraph. You are to be congratulated on your present exhibit, which I have visited 3 times. It is my desire to give a concert in your gallery, a program of largely inter-American music. So the reason I thought the exhibit part was interesting is we already had this resource that exists in our library that lists out all of the exhibits that had gone on in the Phillips Collection for its entire history. So a curator or somebody might come across this letter and think like, oh, I'm curious which exhibit is Lillian Avanti referencing? And, as an artist, she's not a visual artist, but it's nice to see that another artist is appreciating what's going on at the Phillips Collection at that time. Again, 1941 is important because she may have been one of the first people to give a concert at the Phillips Collection. And also the fact that it's inter-American, it's not just focused on North American or European music, is also interesting. So this was also from the Lily and Avanti folder. This is just a cool brochure I thought of her. And obviously she's with the cherry blossoms, which is a very DC thing. So that's kind of just a nice little added bonus, I thought. And then again, just kind of giving a little bit more life to our collection. So this is an excerpt from a letter from 1935. The new Bonnard is downstairs, but the customs man has not come to break the seal, so we have not seen it yet. The box is huge, so I fear poor little Morning over the roofs made hardly a dent. So I actually don't know what Little Morning over the roofs is referring to, and it's very possible that could have been a painting that's been sold since 1935. But based on the information that this is a huge painting, based on the year 1935, it's pretty likely that this Bonnard is the terrace that they're referring to. This is a painting that was acquired in 1935. And as you can see, the dimensions are pretty huge. And so it seems pretty likely that this is what they are talking about. So I just gave a few examples of what can be gained from digitizing a collection like this. And now I'm gonna talk a little bit more about how this digitization is possible. So this is a high-level project workflow. I made this on Google Drawings, but you can probably find something very similar online that kind of just outlines the way to do a project like this. It's nice sometimes to have these things to just kind of plug in, and obviously you still need to do planning out of each stage, but it's nice to be able to stage out your project and have relative confidence that things will turn out okay. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the planning and preparation stage. So for planning and preparation, there are a few things that you really need to do before getting started. It's really important to define your goals and deliverables and make sure that they're actually measurable. You need to figure out who your audience is, because otherwise you may need to change your goals or deliverables, or just change certain aspects of them so that they meet the audience standards. And then, of course, you need to have your goals and deliverables and audience drive the kinds of infrastructure decisions that you make for an archival digitization project. And I will go a little bit more into detail in that in a minute. Obviously, we couldn't have prepared for COVID-19. That was a surprise to many of us, and we just kind of had to go with it. So yeah, there are, of course, things that happen that no matter how much planning you do, you won't be necessarily prepared to handle them. So when I was making my infrastructural decisions, I decided to prioritize sustainability over everything else. So on one side, you have long-term viability. As I mentioned, this is a grant-funded project. So while this position is full-time, it's not permanent. And so it's really important to make decisions that will make sense for the staff in the long run. And you don't want to pick anything that's going to require a ton of maintenance if you don't have anybody lined up to actually perform those duties. On the other side, we have low financial and time costs. I think it's pretty straightforward why low financial cost is important, but time also kind of is related to the staffing issue, especially if you're working on a tight timeline. You want to make sure that whatever you're using isn't going to require a lot of implementation time and a lot of setup time, because otherwise you won't have enough time to work on the actual product of whatever you're trying to do. So if you can balance long-term viability with low financial and time costs, that's where you have a sustainable decision. And the reason that I said that letting your goals drive your decisions is important is because there were systems or softwares that I could have invested in that would have done a great job at getting us to our deliverable goals for this individual project. But they require a lot of upkeep and maintenance. And so rather than focusing on so just basically keeping in mind what goals to prioritize and what can you use that is also sustainable and will help you accomplish your goals. So with that, I chose to use a collection management system that was already in place at the Phillips Collection, but I did decide to invest in a new archival information management system, the ArchivesSpace. So again, this is where it's related to our goals of our project. Our goals are to get these items accessible online, and we don't need anything super fancy to do that. We can actually use the collections management system that was already being used at the Phillips Collection. And I knew that this would be possible because our images of our permanent collection are online through this database. The other thing related to sustainability is that in addition to celebrating our centennial and all the other events going on this year, we also redid our website. And so I knew that one of the most challenging things when you get a new system or tool is making sure that it talks to all the other systems and tools that you need it to. And so I figured if we're already going to be going with a system that will definitely be able to work with our current collections management system, that's one less thing that anybody needs to worry about. So that's why I went with MIMSy-XG. I also had experience using it in the past, so that was really helpful. And then the Phillips Collection instance of ArchiveSpace has been a really great investment because this is actually something that's going to help make all of our collections more accessible, not just the material that's being digitized. So this is a screenshot of our instance of the Phillips Collection ArchiveSpace. And as you can see, there are already finding aids on here. So again, back to what we couldn't prepare for, COVID-19. So as you can see, all three people in this photo are wearing masks. This was, I believe, our first batch going out to the digitization vendor. John Santos is shown right near the car, and he came out to the Phillips Collection to pick up our boxes of material and bring it over to Pixel Acuity. As I mentioned, a lot of flexibility was needed, but we were already in an agreement with Pixel Acuity. And this is a project that's on a timeline, so we didn't want to delay things too much. And so it was really great to continue to work with them even during COVID. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Hannah.
Thank you, Rachel. And while we're getting up the presentation, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing those examples with us. It's really nice for us to be able to see sort of what happens once we send the files to you and sort of how they're used by scholars, researchers, and the institution alike. So thank you for that. That was very special for us. Let me just pull up the presentation. Okay. So now I'll be talking a little bit more about this project from the Pixel Acuity or digitization side. So as you can see by Rachel's last slide, and as she mentioned, this project was initiated in the middle of the COVID pandemic, a time when it was difficult for public-facing cultural heritage institutions to be available and accessible, and when digitization proved even more essential. This project was always planned to be conducted in batches because due to the size of the collection, some physical processing had to take place throughout the production timeframe. So in order to keep the project on track and facilitate material transfer and streamline production during COVID, we actually front-loaded several of the first batches. So we doubled our initial intake to 23 bankers boxes at the end of August of last year. In order to further facilitate processing and production for these boxes, the processing archivist for the collection was actually able to come to our facility in December and further process the remaining materials in order to smoothly move through production later on. This collection was also slightly different from some of our other digitization projects. So while often collection digitization is dependent on grant funding or allocated funding, as was the case here, it sometimes doesn't allow for the digitization of complete collections. So in this particular case, we were digitizing the entire correspondence and photo collections, consisting of over 125,000 items, which allowed us to really digitize on a grander scale and with a broader scope and approach. These are the types of projects that we love. So while we received 4 batches of physical materials throughout the project, the collection organization consisted of these bankers boxes, organized by folder with accompanying inventory spreadsheets. So per sort of an early planning phase discussion with Rachel and the Phillips Collection, we discussed the best way to digitize the collection items and settled on a more holistic approach. So this involved digitizing each folder to provide context and organization structure, as well as all of its contents. So this type of pre-planning enabled us to move quickly and efficiently through production, as we were able to essentially eliminate the decision-making process about whether or not to scan certain items. We were also able to focus on safety and accuracy while we digitized the collection. So the equipment for the project was selected based on the material and needs of the collection, as with any digitization project. In this instance, the collection was very well maintained and organized, and given the size and nature of the correspondence and photo collections, we were able to use a flat copy stand, in this case, the DT element, as our scanning surface. We also used ProPhoto strobes and the Phase 1 IXG camera system that enabled us to capture each image in remarkable detail. And the live view function, as you can see in this image here, helped us to position and place each object in the correct orientation for each capture. For this project, we had multiple deliverables to best meet the institution's needs. So after production, everything went through a post-production phase where we delivered all the file formats requested by the institution. So let me just pull up the slide here. Hold on a second, sorry about that. Sorry, just one moment, minor technical difficulties. Sorry, there we go, sorry about that. So the file formats project, we were actually delivering a number of different files. We were delivering full resolution JPEGs, TIFFs, smaller thumbnail JPEGs, PDFs, and TXT files. We also embedded not only scanner information, but also descriptive metadata information, which was provided by Rachel and her team into the JPEG, TIFF, and PDF files. This descriptive metadata information was on a folder level, and this embedding process allowed for that information to be inextricably linked for every file format. The searchable PDF and TXT files allowed us to utilize our proprietary DT PixelFlow software's optical character recognition, or OCR capabilities, to transcribe the correspondence and create user-friendly documents for scholars and the general public. We also organized the deliverable files in a directory structure that was based not only on file format, but also by box and folder number. The idea behind this was that it would make for an easier organization as well as integration into their digital asset management system that Rachel touched upon. So you can read a little bit more about our OCR work on this project at the link which we'll provide in the chat window. And with that, we look forward to hearing your questions about this collaborative project between the Phillips Collection Archive and Pixel Acuity, and thank you so much for joining us today. So we do have one question from Benjamin Sussman. He says, as you obviously can't add every metadata tag that you would want or those that might be used to the images from the back end, where do you draw the line when building a digital catalog? How do you decide what is essential and what can be excised to expedite the user search process? So Rachel, I think that's for you.
Sure. So one thing that we did in terms of getting embedded metadata from Pixel Acuity is identify all of the universal metadata for the entire collection. So that might include, everything is from the Phillips Collection, so that's an okay thing to embed into the location. Everything is part of the same collection, so that's an okay thing to embed to all of them. And then there's the metadata that's individual to the folder. So there's the title and the dates. So that's kind of how you start. But then from there, again, you're entering everything. You're doing kind of a mass ingest into the digital asset. Well, actually, we're not using a digital asset management system into the collections management system. And so because of that, you're still kind of looking for this more cursory level metadata. But another reason that we did use the collection management system that we did is because since the permanent collection material is also in there, we can add like special tagging in terms of, for example, linking. So if we wanted to use the letter with the between Elmira Beer and the library in Paris as an example, we might tag that letter with Manet, because that's already an asset that exists in the digital, or sorry, in the content in the collections management system. And so you can kind of get more specialized that way. But of course, the OCR is going to help make things more searchable on the website. And the finding aid as well is going to offer a huge supplement in terms of making things searchable.
Thank you, Benjamin. And we now have another question from Louise. So she asks, do you have to get permission from the authors of the letters, etc., before digitization and making them public?
So in this case, a lot of them are old enough that we wouldn't need to, but also because these are institutional records, they are really owned by the Phillips Collection. So an interesting thing about the 45 boxes that went out to the Archives of American Art is the Archives of American Art actually wasn't able to digitize everything and make everything available because the material technically belonged to the Phillips Collection, which actually was a good thing for us in a sense, because it allowed a much more easy transfer of that material back to the Phillips Collection.
Now we have a question from Julie asking, do you envision the Phillips Collection archives working with the art collections to leverage this amazing project for an online exhibition or other special project? Any other future plans for the record once they're all digitized? Which is a great question, Julie.
It is a very nice question, an ambitious question. I would love for that to be the next step with this. We are moving into a space where we need to recontextualize our artists and artwork, for modern sentimentalities and kind of get a better backstory to some of our pieces. Right now, we do have a few of the letters on our Bloomberg app, which they're directly tied with a piece of artwork, but I would hope to see more exhibits that incorporate archival material. And actually, even in the library itself, it would be great to have more exhibits that are showcasing the relationship between the letters and the artwork.
And then we have two questions from Lawrence. Did you perform quality assurance on the images, either automated QA or visual checks? And in a similar vein, do you rely on a color management solution such as Golden Thread? So Rachel, I'm happy to take this one. So essentially, we do perform visual QC checks throughout the digitization process and afterwards. And then we also do use object level targets in every single image for color management, which are able to be run through the Golden Thread software, which is the validation software that we use. So another question from Lawrence, do you use an IIF viewer to display the digital objects online? And did you take into consideration a digital preservation plan when you prepared the digitization project?
So we don't have IIIF, as far as I know, in our website yet. But in terms of making things available right now, we are working on a workflow that allows for the JPEG, or sorry, so when we get the material back, we have the PDF and then we have a sample JPEG. And the reason we have the sample JPEG is because that will automatically populate when you click on one of the folders in our on our website, but it's not IIIF. You can't like zoom in or anything like that, but you can download the material. And in terms of our preservation plan, yes, we do. That has been something that has definitely been a major part of building the infrastructure for something like this at the Phillips. So right now, what I do is I will do a fixity check on the hard drives every time I get a new one from Hannah and Pixel Acuity. And then when I copy them onto our hard drives, I'm doing another check to make sure that nothing got corrupted in the transfer. We are also putting material on the cloud as well as on the drive. So I know that if you follow up, the best standards is to have them in 3 distinct places. Right now, our 3 distinct places are a hard drive, our institution's drive, and then the cloud. So that's not exactly like the best, the highest tier of safety, I would say, but in terms of kind of working with what you have in anticipation of improving things as time goes on, I think that a lot of times that's just what you have to do. You have to, do the best with what you have at the time, but making plans for how to improve things along the way is just kind of how it goes in museums, because there's not endless amounts of money. So.
Unfortunately. And then we have another question from Julie. Can you speak more to how the archival collections can help recontextualize the museum's art holding? Is there a plan for how to pursue that? And then she acknowledges that this is another very ambitious and challenging project.
So I also love that question. We don't have any plans for it yet. The archive did make it into our strategic goals, so that's exciting. I don't know that that's happened in the past. So I think we're kind of moving slowly into the direction of seeing the archive as more of a general resource for things such as, making better descriptive labels for our collection, things like that, and learning more about the history of our material, because now people are asking questions that maybe they weren't concerned with, even 10 years ago. And so if you're able to access this primary source material more readily, you're able to get more questions that are accurate and haven't been shaped by other scholars and things like that. So there's no plans underway, but that would be the ideal next step.
So then our next question is, how long did it take to digitize 125 items? And actually, I'm very happy to say that we finished digitization a few weeks ago and are in a final delivery stage for the project, which is very exciting. So even though we dealt with a global pandemic and a variety of sort of processing and production things along the way, we were able to stay pretty much right on target. One more question that says, what do you wish you knew before embarking in this project? And I'm sure Rachel has her own answer. For me, it would be how to deal with a global pandemic and digitizing a collection. I think this was a true case study in that, and I think we came out very well, all things considered.
So there are definitely a few details that I just wish that I had known about our collection in general before getting started. But I don't know. I mean, as you're saying, I wish I knew how to deal with the pandemic before this got started. A lot of the things that I've been dealing with have kind of been things where it's you just kind of got to go with the flow. But I would say that next time, if I were to start a project like this from scratch, I would have done a much more thorough survey of the material, because although there was a small part of the collection that never left the Phillips collection. It was not in the shape that I expected it to be. And likewise, even though the material was returned to the Archives of American Art, it was in this stage that it was in when Archives of American Art were stewards of it, which they did an amazing job. There were hardly any fasteners on it, and everything was in, as good a shape as they could have been. But there were just like surprising things about processing and whatnot that I think if I had done a more thorough survey before getting started, I would have been able to anticipate a little bit better.
So I think we are nearing the end of our session. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And as you should see, we did just get a poll asking about your digitization process. So if you have a moment, please feel free to fill that out. And thank you all for attending. And I do see we do have one more question about when the recording will be available. I believe Carson can weigh in on this to be 100% sure, but I believe you'll be sent an email shortly after the end of the webinar. And yes, Carson has confirmed the recording will be available tomorrow, and you'll receive a follow-up with an opportunity to take a survey as well.